Hello and welcome back, everybody. If you're new here, my name is Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold. If you're listening over on Spotify, it is Untold Crimes with Liz. Welcome back. In today's upload, we are going to be talking about the Bennington Triangle. Now, the Bennington Triangle is in Vermont, which is in New England, or in the northeast part of the United States of America. To be specific, the Bennington Triangle has been documented over years and years and years of being a mysterious triangle, or like a hypothetical mysterious triangle. Now, this area is centered on the Glastonbury Mountain, which is basically like the woods around it, the trails around it are the basis of what I'm going to be talking about today and the cases that are involved in it. Now, these towns that are immediately surrounding it include Somerset, Glastonbury, Shaftesbury, Woodford, and Bennington. Now, the 3 points of the Bennington Triangle include Somerset, Glastonbury, and, would you guess it, Bennington. Well, most of these towns were logging or industrial towns, and obviously they would start to decline within the early or like the late 19th century, essentially becoming ghost towns. Obviously, what happens with ghost towns, we have some strange tales that go along with these ghost towns. So, what I'm going to be talking to you about today is the 5 missing cases that are, or the 5 prominently known missing cases that are involved with the Bennington Triangle. It is quite a doozy, my friend. So, let's get on into it today. Like I mentioned already, where this is with the mountain that we are talking about in particular, this is in an area of southwestern Vermont in which multiple people have went missing in the years between 1945 and 1950. There's actually earlier cases, but we are not going to get into those in this video. I'm going to put that in a separate video. There is also a similar area in Massachusetts and Rhode Island called the Bridgewater Triangle, and I will also be talking about that in a future video, so stay tuned for that as well, or future podcast episode. There is a ton of speculation, obviously, in this case when it comes to supernatural or being considered supernatural or having a supernatural connection to it. Like I already mentioned, the triangle points are supposedly located in Glastonbury, Bennington, and Somerset, Vermont. And obviously, we're dealing with mountains. This is in the Green Mountain Valley area. So let's start with our first case, that of Mitty Rivers. So while out hunting or on a hunting trip on November 12th of 1945, 74-year-old Mitty Rivers, who was actually a local hunting guide, disappeared around the area of Route 9 and Long Trail Road. You see, Mitty was with 4 others on this weekend hunting trip in the mountains. It was that morning when he was walking with Joe Luzon, his son-in-law, when they would walk together. And just a simple, casual walk, out with your son-in-law. Until they reached a fork in the path. Mitty decided to take one side and they would separate. He told Joe that he would only be a short distance and that he would come back to base camp in time for lunch. He wanted to check out some things, but for them not to worry about it, seeing as how he was a seasoned hunter and he knew this area very well. But when the time came and went, he didn't return back to base camp and they had no idea where he was. They would look for him, but the only thing they would find would be a single spent rifle cartridge in the stream, and it's thought that this fell out of his pocket down into the stream, or that it was post him using, his rifle. He went missing in the area of Harbor Road, which is an area in which he usually, he wasn't really familiar with, and he was also told to stay away from the area he was in due to the strange activity and how just bizarre it was. And this is in Hell Hollow, which I also find that very bizarre that he got that kind of he was told to stay away from this area because of how strange it is. So obviously, like I mentioned, the oddity about this is that he's extremely familiar with the surrounding area except for where he went missing. And he was obviously very experienced with the outdoors. He was a huntsman. He was literally a local hunting guide. He knew this area like the back of his hand, except for this one specific area in which he went missing. So for him to go missing was something that wouldn't necessarily happen with how seasoned he was. They still literally to this day have no idea what happened to him, and the only thing that was left behind was that single cartridge. His remains have never been found. So our next one is the more prominently talked about and more widespread, like on the media. And this is Paula Jean Weldon. So after she finished her shift while working in the dining hall of Bennington College, a sophomore, Paula Jean Weldon, she was 18 years old, went home or went back to her dorm at Dewey House and changed it to something she could comfortably walk in. This is on December 1st of 1946. December 1st, remember this date because it comes in, like, when you hear it again, it will blow your mind. So after she changed, she talked with her roommate, Elizabeth Johnson, for a while, and then she would go and hitchhike to the trailhead. She got a ride from Route 67A to where the Furnace Bridge is on State Route 9, and this is between Woodford Hollow and Bennington. So the man that actually picked her up, his name is Lewis Knapp. He was investigated, but that investigation was dropped. No charges were brought to him. He was cleared. He brought her up about 2.5 miles, and it's believed that she had either walked or hitchhiked the rest of the way to the start of the long trail at Woodford Hollow. She was seen entering, but had no coat, she had no water, and no food. See, at the time, sunset would happen at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and obviously, this is December 1st. This is the winter in Vermont, in New England. It's cold, it's snowy. Yeah, you don't want to be out for too long because of hypothermia. So she was dressed appropriately for the time, like at that specific time at 4 p.m., but not for nighttime. Because at that time, obviously, you're in the winter in the Northeast, your temperature is going to drop and it's going to get very cold. And that's exactly what happened. It is certain that she would have definitely experienced hypothermia if she was out for too long at night without having a thick coat on. The last recorded sighting of her is at 4 p.m., but she hasn't been seen since that last sighting. She was on the long trail hiking route. That was the last time anybody saw her. It is also said that she wanted to have a few other students go with her or friends at college, but unfortunately they were all busy and she just went by herself instead of staying at her dorm. Her roommate thought that Paula was just studying at the library when she noticed that she didn't come back home. See, at this time, in order to stay a night away from the college, you actually had to sign out, and Paula did not sign out. So when the next day rolled around, still no Paula, Elizabeth obviously became very worried, and she alerted their administration. Administration was notified. They also notified the authorities, notified her family, and this is when the sheriff was brought in. They found out about her going to the trail by a hiker of whom identified her via a picture, but other than this, they found nothing. Multiple search parties, but nothing came of it. They went as far as going to the Glastonbury Mountain on Long Trail and completed air searches. They also searched along Route 9 to Brattleboro, but nothing. There was even hopes with looping in the Connecticut State Police as well and the Massachusetts State Police. There was also 3 potential dark theories for what happened to her. She was depressed and died via suicide, she was kidnapped, or she had been murdered. Because at the time there was no state police, they needed help with this case, so they asked Connecticut State Police and Massachusetts State Police for help. Also, during their investigation, there was a man named Fred Gaudette who saw Paula when he was actually fighting with his girlfriend while they were on Harbor Road. This man was a lumberjack by trade, and when he was done fighting with his girlfriend, he simply just, got in his car and drove off. But later we would find out he would say that he knew exactly where Paula was buried. But when he was confronted by the authorities, he basically didn't know what they were talking about. He kind of just brushed it off as he didn't do it, which is kind of strange. You think that somebody that reportedly spoke to at least 2 people and said that he knew exactly where Paula was buried, then would, go back on his words. Strange. He also lied to police on several different occasions. He was listed as a person of interest back in 1946 and also when the case was reopened in 1952, but they would, lessen the look into him as well. Over time, there's been speculation about what has happened to her and possible sightings of her, but nothing ever came to fruition. There was even one possibility that she left college to be with her boyfriend and ran off to Canada. But that doesn't seem to be the case because she seems to be quite a happy person, was very happy at college. She grew up in a very well-off family in Stamford, Connecticut. She was the oldest of four girls, and her family loved her. I mean, she wanted to switch her major to possibly being a singer, and she also liked botany. So I don't really understand this speculation at all. I will say there is one positive about this is that due to the lack of trying to stay on task in all of the mistakes that were made by the local sheriff's office at the time, this is what resulted in the formation of the Vermont State Police, which I'm very thankful for, because with this, there's more accountability with future investigations. James E. Tedford went missing on December 1st of 1949. Yes, December 1st, 1949. He went missing exactly 3 years after the disappearance of Paula Jean Weldon. You see, James E. Tedford was a veteran. He was a two-time veteran, and he was living at the Bennington Soldiers' Home and was actually visiting St. Albans. He was visiting family around this time. It is said that he went to the local bus station. His family, went with him to the local bus station, and this was the last time he was seen getting on that bus in St. Albans. It also was said that he was still on the bus prior to it arriving at the last stop in Bennington. But here's the weird thing. His things were still on the bus. His suitcase, everything was still there. This was so strange because he quite literally vanished without a trace between the last two bus stops. There was no trace of him found at all, at any of the stops, other than his luggage or even on the bus itself. His disappearance wasn't reported until about a week after he went missing, which is even more bizarre. There is speculation surrounding why he was in St. Albans and why he would be in Franklin around this time. So when he left to serve his tour in World War II, he was married to his wife Pearl, and he left her at their home in Franklin. Now, it said when he returned, that's when he came home to find his home abandoned and Pearl was gone. Apparently, she went to a local Amico station and she disappeared shortly after he went off to serve his tour. But what is said locally is that he was visiting her in Franklin, repeatedly, and he was also visiting family. We don't know this completely for certain. This is all speculation, but it's also speculated that he was depressed around this time, and he said he didn't want to go back to the soldiers' home. Because he was, seeing his wife, he was happy, he was seeing his family. He has not been seen since the last time he was, any sighting of him happened at that bus stop, him getting on the bus in St. Albans. 8-year-old Paul Jepson, who went by Buddy simply, was out and about with his mother on October 12th of 1950. They were going to run some errands when she stopped to feed some pigs at around 4 p.m. and Buddy was sitting unattended in the cab of the truck. This was at a 50-acre estate in which her and her husband were caretakers. This was for about 15 minutes. As if it doesn't sound good already, Buddy also had special needs or was a special needs child. So it would be easy for someone to possibly coerce his child in order to lure them away from the vehicle he was in. Mr. Jepson would also admit that his son's special needs case was a nervous condition, that even though he was 8, he had the mind of a 5-year-old. Now, to me, that doesn't seem like a nervous condition. To me, that seems like he would be on the spectrum, but back then, talk of being on the spectrum wasn't actually a thing. I know that for a fact because one of my great aunts was actually sent to Danvers State Hospital, and we have her records of basically what shows that she was a high functioning autistic person. who would lash out and bite somebody if they took her crayons from her and any of her coloring apparatus from her. She was verbal at times, but she kept to herself. She was often nervous when people would go after her. She got very fatigued very fast in the afternoon. And like her, this is what would happen to Buddy. Mr. Jepson was told after he would bring Buddy all the way to Boston for treatment and see some specialist in Bennington that he would improve over time, but he never did. And Buddy oftentimes would be fine until the noon, and then he would become extremely fatigued and his condition would come out. And what I mean by come out is what they say in the articles that I read. Basically, what that means is that all of his symptoms would come to a head and he would lash out because how tired he is, his aggression would come out. It's like what happens when somebody has an anxiety attack and they don't know what's happening and they lash out on others. Or if you bottle something in for so long, you lash out. Your behaviors become more aggressive. So that's basically what was happening to Buddy during these fits. And they would talk about this a lot in the local media, the newspapers, that and any of the articles I read in regards to this, all of them mentioned this. He also would talk about within the last few days before Buddy's disappearance, Buddy was talking about nothing else except for how he felt lured to the mountains or feeling a pull to the mountains. This is very strange. Very strange. After the sheriff's involvement, this is Sheriff John H. Maloney of Bennington. He was quick to agree with Buddy's dad that Buddy had indeed gone missing, and he was also very open about saying he had a few leads or was working a few angles, but he couldn't really say much about it. This was reported on the 30th of October of 1950, which around this date also will come in, like, you need to remember these dates too, because in a few moments you're going to understand as to why I said that. Well, this was obviously just a few weeks after he went missing. I will say between all the source material, there's varying accounts about how long his mom was actually away from him. One article says she was gone for an hour. Another one says she was gone for 15 minutes. And multiple actually say 15 minutes. I'm assuming she meant to say it would only take her about an hour to do everything, but realistically it only took her about 15 minutes. There was search parties that were launched, but they found nothing. One search party also included a bloodhound, in which this bloodhound led them down a logging road, but ultimately they lost the scent. There was a search of Bald Mountain and down the east side of Long Trail, where Paula Walden went missing, but they also had to take into consideration that Buddy had left home on his own accord, not once, but on 2 other occasions. During these 2 times, Buddy would take something off, one of his articles of clothing, and drop it while he was walking somewhere. And he would more than likely end up at a neighbor's. He hadn't gone far, and obviously, this time he must have gone far because nobody can find a trace of him. This also is something else that if somebody can't remember what they're doing, they will leave. It's kind of like a roadmap for you to find your way back. If you're wearing stuff for multiple things, you're able to take them off and just kind of like put them on the ground. That way, when you come to, you can follow that trail back to where he came from. So that's probably what he was doing during those 2 other occasions. But on this day when he went missing, obviously that didn't happen. But we have no idea what actually happened. Now this leads us to our last case that we're going to be talking about, and that's of Frida Langer. So Frida Langer is a 53-year-old experienced hiker and survivalist that actually went missing in the Somerset area of East Glastonbury. This is along bordered the Long Trail. While on a hike with her cousin, Herbert Eisner, they stopped about a half mile into it, and then she fell into the stream. Following this, she would turn back to go to their camp, which was actually set up near the Somerset Reservoir, to change. This camp was literally a quarter of a mile away from where they were. But neither Herbert or her husband, Max Langer, who actually hurt his knee and he was resting at their camp, saw her return. This was on October 28th of 1950, literally around the same time that these articles came out about Buddy. Remember how I said October 30th when the sheriff was talking about Buddy? Literally at this exact same time, that's when Frida Langer went missing. This couple was actually from North Adams, Massachusetts, and they were just there to enjoy a hiking trip. The search for her happened almost immediately, but they didn't find anything. The search would indeed continue into the next morning, but they didn't find her. It wouldn't be until May 12th of 1951, approximately 6 months after she went missing, that two fishermen saw a body at the Somerset Reservoir, which is strange because they searched in this exact location 6 months prior but did not find her. It was determined that maybe she fell into the reservoir and drowned, but there was no determined inclination of exactly what happened to her or a determined cause of death. It also isn't clear, fully what happened to her. We have no idea. She would be the only one of the victims that the remains would be found, which is also odd. I will say that there is a ton of speculation when it comes to these cases. A lot of speculations indeed also post what happened to Robert Singley. So Robert Singley was a 27-year-old Bennington College student that got lost in 2008, and he got lost in the Bennington Triangle in 2008. He got lost and was found safe by the Vermont State Police, and his interpretation of what happened that night definitely is one that is very strange. Very strange indeed. This triangle has been featured multiple times in multiple media sources currently at most terrifying places of America on the Travel Channel. They go over the missing persons in this 5-year span, the 5 cases that I was just talking about. They also talk about the Bigfoot-like creature that apparently roams this area. Yeah, there's a lot of speculation whether this is actually, supernatural, a coincidence, or they just have no idea. No idea whatsoever. I will say something interesting is that the author Shirley Jackson could have been inspired by Paula Walden's vanishing when she wrote her book Hangsiman. I think that's how you say it. Yeah, Hangsiman, which is actually her second novel that she published. I almost said purchased, but published. And this is about a girl that goes missing and she descends into her madness while she's attending college. It's actually really good. And then there is another novel that is loosely based on Paula Walden's disappearance, and that is Last Seen Wearing, which is by Hilary Waugh. And that is another one that is actually really good as well. You can probably find it at your local Barnes & Noble or any other bookstore, or you can just buy it on Amazon like everybody else does.